Salams, you're watching People's Dispatch, and this is the daily debrief coming to you from our studios here in New Delhi. I'm Siddhant Ani, and today we're continuing our coverage of 1 year of the war in Ukraine. And joining us in studio to talk at length, perhaps or at least as long as time permits on this episode, about all aspects of the ongoing conflict, including, of course, efforts towards a peace that will have an impact on the entire world, is Newsclick Editor-in-Chief Prabir Purkayastha, who's been covering not just the war since it began, but also in sort of while things were building up, and before that, the COVID-19 pandemic in depth and what kind of impact that has had in the lead up to the state of the global economy at present. Prabir, good to have you with us. We'll take a bit longer of your time today than we usually do. Let's start with a subject that we have covered at length, which is, of course, energy and the impact that this war has had on the global energy security situation, particularly in Europe.
Well, it was clear from the beginning that any war between NATO and Russia being fought in Ukraine in this case would lead or could lead to the energy flows, particularly taking place from Russia into Western Europe. Now, Western Europe is dependent on external energy because it really has discontinued its coal. Germany used to produce coal. It discontinued that, though it's brought some of it back again. France produces nuclear, is a large producer of nuclear energy, but Germany has gone out of that as well. So for most European countries, energy is really now liquid natural gas, oil. That's the basis of their energy for most countries. Now, they're heavily energy deficient, except Norway. Nobody really produces much. Ukraine, a couple of others used to produce something, but it's really Norway which is the major producer. And of course, they have benefited during the war from import from the United States, because not too much seems to have come from West Asia. So given that, they have been beneficiaries of the war and losers in the war. Beneficiaries in the war has been the United States and Norway. And we have charts which show how much they have gained out of this war in terms of supplying Germany and other countries. The loss has been for West European countries. Russia hasn't lost as much because Russia, the prices went high, and therefore, even though it supplied less oil and gas, particularly to Western Europe, but it also gained in terms of the price hike that took place at that time. If you remember, it went quite high. Gas prices in Europe rose 4 times, 5 times. So given that, they also benefited from the hike in prices.
Right.
So their loss has not been as much as they had hoped, particularly West European countries and the United States, who thought the sanctions will bring down Russia. That did not happen. But really what has hit the West European economies hard is the industry, which is particularly for the energy-intensive industries. They have taken a huge hit. Metals, for instance, metallurgical processes depend on that. Fertilizers, the chemical industry, glass making, all of these have taken a huge hit. And a lot of them have shut down. And they're thinking of even shifting to the United States. Whether they will shift to China or not is a different issue.
Yeah.
Because that's a geopolitical issue that comes up. But given all this, the net loser has been Western Europe in this very clearly, except Norway, with the exception of Norway. And of course, the United States has been the net gainer. Russia hasn't lost as much as the war would have indicated, because people thought, particularly the United States and Western European countries, the United Kingdom, they thought that Russia will come to its knees in 3 months.
Yeah.
That did not happen. And that also shows that countries which depend on primary production, whether it be steel, whether it be coal, whether it be oil, whether it be gas, and of course agricultural goods, food. that these are difficult to stop from the global market. If they do, of course, the poorer countries in Africa, Asia also get hit. And as we found with the fertilizers, even the United States farmers were getting hit.
Yeah.
So given that, it's very difficult to keep a large producer of commodities who not only produce agricultural commodities, but also industrial commodities at industrial scale, keep it out of the market. And of course, Russia in this case is also a major energy producer. So given all of this, the net loser on the energy front has been Western European industry and of course the people whose heating bills, their electricity bills have gone up by 3 times, 4 times. So they have taken a huge hit both on their incomes and as well as on the expenditure. On both sides they have been hit, and therefore I really don't understand the politics of that by which they have allowed themselves to be put in this position and not really looked, instead of lengthening the war, how to shorten it and look for peace. Because it would be in Western Europe's interest to do so. But at the moment, we don't see any moves towards that politically.
Praveen, this brings, like you correctly pointed out, into very sharp focus the whole idea of sanctions being the means to arrive at an end to conflict. Whereas it is essentially a coercive measure, and it has led to sort of large-scale mobilizations across Western Europe by the same people that you're seeing are impacted the most by it. Whether it's those who are saying that inflation means we need to have wages that keep pace with it, but the money is not coming. How do you sort of look at this as a turning point in that sense? That in order to solve this problem, there needs to be a wider solution towards in terms of what's happening with global finance and things like that. We have meetings of the G20 finance ministers happening in India as we speak.
So when you talk about the sanctions and the political response to sanctions, there are 2 parts to it. One is the United States has been the leader of sanctions, particularly after it became the global hegemon post-90s. In fact, they have had sanctions war on a number of countries. And sanctions, of course, is something that predates the 90s. But there were more financial sanctions with respect to their trade policies, which is, for instance, threats to India regarding patents law and so on. But if you look at it post-90s, they have used it to essentially beat down countries politically, make them surrender. And this has been something which they have really extended continuously. I think recently I saw a chart which shows how many sanctions they have. And the US sanctions are something like 16,000 sanctions. So how do they keep count of that, I don't know. But this whole sanctions regime that they have introduced, which is really very detailed, which also uses not only the political power of the United States, but also the fact that the dollar is basically the globe's reserve currency. And the banking system, which was operating to the SWIFT system, if you remember, it was a Belgium company, but it sort of got taken over by the United States because one of the servers in the US, and therefore they argued that if anything touches us, it comes under our political domination, so to say. Therefore, anything we say has to be implemented by the SWIFT system. So virtually it has become an adjunct to the American system. So the SWIFT system, because all the banks were doing their transaction using the SWIFT system, the SWIFT system does not really transact money. It transacts information. So that part of it they thought would lead to their ability to really throw Russia out of the financial system.
Completely isolated.
Yeah, because if the SWIFT threw them out, the banks would get thrown out and therefore they would have no way to transact business. That has been not successful. And Russia, maybe with some China's help, maybe with the help from United Arab Emirates, in the case of India, that's what we seem to have used. They're finding ways around the SWIFT system and around the use of the dollar, but using some other set of currencies. Now, is there anything which works in long term on that? We don't know. But there is no question that sanctions is leading increasingly to what I will call the law of diminishing returns. That it is not helping the US as much, it is not helping the other side as much. Both are getting damaged in the process.
Yeah.
But in this war particularly, unlike other wars like Iraq, even Venezuela, which is not a small country, Iran, again not a small country, but in this war, what it has done is it's brought Russia at the forefront of the sanctions war, and therefore Russia's interest in now working with Iran, working with Venezuela, all of it, and of course backstop by China, means that at the moment they are finding alternatives to the SWIFT system and the reserve currency being the dollar. There is no immediate solution to this problem for them, but obviously there are certain things which are emerging. But one thing I think is an overriding issue over here, that we know that sanctions hurt the people, they don't hurt the regime as much, governments as much, we know that. But in this particular case, what is also important is that Russia is a supplier of goods, physical goods which the world needs, from energy to all the things we discussed earlier. Therefore, to sanction Russia, what do you do for fertilizers? Do Africa then, does it go without fertilizers? Does India go without fertilizers? What does it do with energy? Maybe it has all other options for energy. But for fertilizers, food, etc., very difficult to think of the world without Russia, also for energy. So all of this, if you take together, the US use of the sanctions weapon and Western Europe's use of the sanctions weapon against Russia doesn't seem to have affected Russia. There's only 2.2%, according to them, drop of the GDP of Russia. And they have become, quote unquote, more self-reliant as a consequence. Therefore, it doesn't even affect them as much. Effect on a lot of other countries is quite significant, and I think that's where you see the political resistance come from others. The tragedy is the people of Western Europe, who also should be now talking about it, even though some of them have come out in streets and so on, I think the political hegemony that the US exercises, particularly because of its soft power, the media, I think all of it means that even now, the dominant opinion in all of this is not to look at the war as it is happening and what's really happening to Ukraine, but to look at it with the ideological lens that how do we defeat Russia, and therefore, if not conquer, but at least to knock it out as a leading power in the world. Russia is a major producer not only of primary goods, but of also manufactured goods, agriculture. It's a nuclear power. Therefore, to think about defeating Russia politically, militarily, is, I think, now increasingly be realized as a pipe dream. But are they really the Western popular opinion, governments, are they rethinking this issue? Because it's they who will determine whether the war continues or not the United States, which is not in the forefront of the war. It's they who are at the forefront of war with Russia. And of course, the war is taking place, as somebody said, is being fought to the last Ukrainian. So the Ukraine is, of course, going to suffer the most, but Ukraine doesn't seem to have the political autonomy to have a policy independent of what the Western powers are telling them.
Right. Which brings us to a recent development, and we covered this on the day of Vladimir Putin's speech, where he addressed the nation and also pulled Russia out of New START, which is in some ways the only existing framework for arms reduction, particularly strategic weapons, that exists between the US and Russia. And so if you can give us a little bit of historical context also regarding these treaties, and why, of course, it worries the entire world, but this is a particularly worrying development again for those in whose backyard this conflict is happening.
Well, what is the status of Russia vis-a-vis the New START treaty, which is set to expire in 2026, is not that clear. He has said that they could be pulling out of New START, but does it mean he will let it lapse, or does it mean right now? Again, not clear. The statement is suspend. Now, suspension of a treaty really doesn't mean anything, except those provisions of the treaty which already has created a conflict. That is that Russia should be able to inspect US sites, US should be able to inspect Russian sites. Now, the Americans have been quite clever in this. They said, we're not forbidding you to come and visit our sites, but commercial traffic is sanctioned. You can't do that. military traffic is sanctioned. You can't enter the United States. And you can use therefore some other way of coming. Not clear how. But therefore no exemption on that count. So effectively it means that post-COVID, that the ability to inspect each other's facilities, which is the counterpart to freezing of the warheads and so on, bring it down to a certain number, which is what the New START did, that verification process where every warhead, where it would stay, where it would go, all these movements would also be informed to the other side, it could be verified. All of this verification procedure has stopped. So Russia has said, we won't let you verify our side as long as we don't have the access to your side. As I said, the US claims they have not stopped it. They could just come in some other way, except not on their aircraft, not using other things.
Yeah.
They could, how they will buy the ticket, they could find commercial aircraft. Now, all of this is prevarication. Okay. The point is you don't want inspection to take place. And if you could, if you wanted New START to continue, you could say, okay, we'll let you tell us when, we'll let your aircraft come, military aircraft come and visit, and we will facilitate that. This could have solved it, but this has been going on for more than a year now. And at the end of it, there's no resolution. He said that we are pulling out of New START. But what is also much more worrying is that apart from the fact that he has not said increasing warhead, that's a good part. He's not saying about increasing warhead.
Or any unprovoked testing even for that matter.
No testing. If they test, we will test, not otherwise. But what is happening is deployment of new missiles. That he has said that he is going to do. Now, that is probably okay under the New START as long as they inform where and how it is going to be positioned. I think the New START allows that, as long as the warheads and the launchers are not increased. So it's a grey area. What does suspension of the New START mean? Certainly after 2026 it would lapse. Both sides, either side does not renew it, it lapses. Therefore those dangers are there. I think the more important part of it is that we are going on a path of nuclear collision, and that, given both sides have enough weapons to destroy the world 10 times over, this is certainly a very uncertain path for civilization's future. And the fact that all the steps are being taken apparently on the Ukraine conflict makes it appear that defeating Russia by the United States is much more important than anything else. This is what it has now become. And I think it has become this because they have, as they say, bet the house on this. So they have no other recourse but to try and step up the ante as much as possible, even if it veers off into a nuclear, not exchange, but certainly as a nuclear contest, at least in terms of how and what will be the future for the nuclear regime. So I think we are into very dangerous and uncertain territory. And the problem is that the world seems to be sleepwalking into this. Countries which should be intervening are also somehow unwilling to take positions because they have stakes in both houses, so to say. Whether it is Russia, whether it's the United States and the West. It does appear countries like India, Brazil, of course China would be the next target. So their ability to bring peace is limited. They are talking about making peace proposals, but let's face facts. They are the next target for the United States, and the United States has said it almost explicitly.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So there is nothing hidden about it. So given that the ability of the world to bring peace, there is no block of countries willing to say that. And I think that's a problem. There is nobody who is quote unquote an honest broker. And that's where we really missed the non-aligned movement, which did play a major role in such kind of conflict, starting with the Korean conflict. So I think that's where we really are, where we miss a set of leaders who could take this forward independently and say, look, for the sake of the world, for the sake of humanity, you need to stop this war, instead of going further on this. You know, the terms on which this war has to end is also quite clear. There's no way Russia is going to lose. So Question is, do you freeze the war at the moment, make it like South Korea, North Korea, have it at that so both sides can declare, okay, we've achieved our objective, we have not surrendered, we have not won, they have not lost, something like this? Or do we try and take this forward, hoping that Russia at one point will surrender, which seems at the moment completely unlikely as a scenario. And at the moment, it is really Russia which is leading to the, shall we say, the disarming of the West, because they don't seem to have enough weapons, enough ammunition, and tanks is not the issue. It's become really an artillery battle. And in terms of production of shells, the amount they have in the stock and what they're producing, they seem to be completely mismatched at the moment. Going by Western sources, I'm not going by what other sources are saying, but what the Western sources are saying. So I don't know why they are still continuing on this, shall we say, betting the whole house on this and not backing off. 3 months after the war, Zelensky and Russia had already reached a kind of agreement. And instead of that, they have upped the ante. And today, they are worse off than they were at that time.
Thanks very much for that. And on that note, we, of course, invite you to follow us on the social media platform of your choice for updates on all of the work we do. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Daily Debrief, continuing our coverage of all kinds of issues from around the world. We invite you to head to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, for details on, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war, but also all of the other work that we are doing. See you on Monday. Until then, goodbye.